Before you decide what to think of me, let me take you back to the very beginning. On the morning of my 62nd birthday, I believed I was about to have one of the happiest days of my year. I woke up with a smile, slipped into my favorite sweater, even styled my thinning hair with extra care. I thought I was heading out for lunch, maybe even cake, laughter, and a few hours of love and celebration. But instead of candles, I was handed a suitcase. Instead of joy, I was abandoned. That was only the start. And if you believe betrayal only comes from strangers, then you've never felt it wearing your own last name. Stick with me until the very end, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Because this one's going to stay with you. They say a mother's love is unconditional, that it's patient, forgiving, and everlasting. And I used to believe that with all my heart. I lived it every day of my life. Every scraped knee I patched up. Every sleepless night I stayed awake. Every school play I clapped for. I did it for my only child, my son, Brandon. That morning, I woke with a familiar warmth in my chest, the anticipation of being remembered, of being valued. I may have been living alone in my modest little house in Dayton, Ohio, but my heart was hopeful. Brandon hadn't been calling much lately. He always said work was crazy, that things with his wife were tense. But surely on my birthday, he'd show up. I even made pancakes, his childhood favorite. I set 2 plates at the table, humming to myself like an old fool, waiting for the knock at the door. By noon, the plates were still untouched. The butter had melted, the pancakes had gone cold, and my smile was fading. But I refused to let myself spiral. I checked my phone over and over, reread old text messages just to remind myself that there was still a connection, that I still mattered to him. Hours crawled by. Then, at exactly 3 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened the door. And there he was, Brandon, standing with that boyish grin he used to wear when he wanted something. He held a small grocery store bouquet, the kind wrapped in plastic. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said. I swallowed the sting in my chest and hugged him tightly. "You came?" I asked, my voice trembling with both joy and disbelief. "Of course," he replied, patting my back with a stiffness that didn't match his words. "Get dressed." I made lunch reservations. I didn't question it. Not for a second. I was so excited that I practically floated to my bedroom. I grabbed my purse, slid on a pair of shoes that pinched my toes but looked nice, and followed him to the car. I felt like a teenager going to prom. My son was taking me out for my birthday. But as the miles rolled by, something felt wrong. We weren't driving toward the city. We weren't near any restaurants I knew. Instead, the car pulled into a long driveway lined with maple trees, their leaves painted in shades of gold and crimson. My heart skipped as I looked up at the sign. Willow Pines Senior Living Facility. I froze, my stomach twisted into knots. "Brandon, what is this?" He cleared his throat, eyes glued to the steering wheel. "Mom, we need to talk. This isn't safe anymore. You live alone." "With your memory lapses, what memory lapses?" I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. He kept going, ignoring my protest. "I found a great place for you. It's safe, comfortable. You'll have people your age, activities, staff to take care of you." I let out a laugh. But it wasn't joy. It was the kind of laugh that's bitter, empty, the kind that doesn't sound like laughter at all. "You brought me here? On my birthday?" He got out of the car, motioning for me to follow. "Come on, Mom, let's go inside." I shook my head. "No." That's when he opened the trunk, and my blood ran cold. Inside was my suitcase, already packed. I stared at it, frozen. My hands trembled. You went through my things?" He sighed, his patience thinning. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." At that moment, the world around me went silent. I stood there frozen, staring at the suitcase in his trunk like it was a coffin. My life, folded, zipped, and shoved aside without my consent. "You packed my things," I whispered. Brandon avoided my eyes, his jaw tight. "It's for the best, Mom. Don't make a scene." A scene? My only son had brought me to a nursing facility on my birthday, and he was worried about me making a scene. I refused to move, but Brandon was relentless. He reached for my arm, guiding me toward the building. The lobby smelled of antiseptic and overcooked vegetables, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes long after you leave. At the reception desk, smiling faces welcomed us like I was just another box to check off. Brandon handed over a stack of legal papers. My name, his signature, power of attorney, transfer of rights. It was done. I didn't cry then, not yet. I was too stunned, too hollow. I let them lead me down a bland, hallway to a room that felt more like a hospital cell than a home, beige walls, an adjustable bed, a tiny window that stared at a brick wall, my birthday present. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my coat, staring at the cracks in the linoleum floor. No cake, no candles, just silence. Hours passed like slow poison. Finally, I reached for the bouquet Brandon had given me. By then, the flowers had already wilted from the car ride. Their petals sagged, limp and lifeless, just like I felt. That night, I lay awake, listening to the muffled shuffle of nurses and the distant drone of a television down the hall. The sheets smelled of bleach. The mattress was too firm. My chest ached as I replayed every conversation I'd had with Brandon over the past year, searching for the signs I'd missed. The excuses, the lies, the times he said I was forgetting when I wasn't, the way he dismissed me with a sigh, or borrowed money I never saw again. And still, I defended him. I always defended him, because that's what mothers do, right? We forgive, we love, we sacrifice. But that night, something in me cracked, something I didn't know could break. The next morning, I asked one of the nurses for my phone. I wanted to call someone, anyone. She gave me a pitying smile. "Oh, sweetheart, your son took care of that. He said it was too confusing for you." My stomach dropped. My son had taken my phone, cut off my only connection to the outside world. And in that moment, I realized the truth. I wasn't here to be cared for. I was here to be erased. And if I didn't find a way out, Brandon would succeed. But here's the thing. I'm not as fragile as they think I am. Not even close. For 2 days, I barely ate. Not because I was trying to make a statement, but because the food sat in front of me like slop, and I couldn't stomach the taste of pity. Do you know what it feels like to be treated as though you're no longer useful? Like your entire life, decades of sacrifice, love, and resilience has been reduced to a patient chart and a room number? It shatters something inside you. The nurses tried to be kind. They called me sweetheart and honey, like I was a child. They smiled at me as though their pity was some kind of gift. But none of them asked me who I was before I walked through those doors. None of them cared about the woman I had been. To them, I was just another frail old lady shuffling around in slippers. Even if I hadn't forgotten a damn thing, my roommate Doris snored through the night and mumbled through the day. The few times she spoke, it was about children who hadn't visited her in years. Her loneliness echoed my own. I tried to keep my mind sharp. Crossword puzzles, books, the news on TV. Anything to remind myself that I was still me, that I hadn't vanished completely. But deep down, I felt myself sinking. And then, on the 4th day, everything changed. On the 4th day, I wandered outside into the tiny courtyard. The staff called a garden. It wasn't much, just a patch of grass surrounded by a high fence, a couple of benches, and a stone fountain that no longer worked. I sat there staring at the dead fountain, wondering if this was it. Was this where I'd spend the rest of my days? Fading into the background, while my son went on with his life without me? And then I saw her, a woman in her late 60s, dressed in a flowy scarf and wide-brimmed hat, sitting with a sketchbook balanced on her lap. Her silver hair caught the sun, and there was something sharp in her eyes, like she saw the world clearer than anyone else. She looked up from her sketchbook and smirked. "You look like someone who hates this place as much as I do." I blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" She chuckled. "Don't act shocked. Everyone here walks around pretending this is a retirement paradise. But you," she pointed her pencil at me, "you look like someone who knows better." Her name was Ruby. And Ruby was nothing like the others. She wasn't meek. She wasn't resigned. She had a spark, a defiance, as if she refused to let this place swallow her whole. I found myself sitting beside her, and before I knew it, words were pouring out of me. I told her about Brandon, about the birthday dinner that turned into a betrayal, about the suitcase, about the phone he stole from me. Ruby listened, her pencil still scratching the page, her eyes narrowing in quiet fury. When I finished, she slammed her sketchbook shut. "Your son made a mistake," she said firmly. "He thinks you're powerless, but he doesn't know what you're capable of yet." Her words rattled around in my chest. No one had spoken to me like that in years, not since my husband passed. "Capable?" I whispered. "Ruby, I don't even know where to start. He's taken everything from me." Ruby leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Then it's time you take something back. You don't survive in this world by waiting for people to hand you respect. You claim it." Her eyes glinted as she pulled a small flip phone from her bag and pressed it into my palm. "Here," she said. "Use mine. Make a call." I froze, the weight of that phone heavier than it should have been. For the first time since Brandon abandoned me here, I felt like I had a lifeline. But who could I call? Who would even believe me? Ruby seemed to read my hesitation. "Don't think too hard. Just remember this, revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's quiet, strategic, surgical. You want your son to regret what he's done? Then don't just cry about it. Outplay him." Her words lit a fire inside me. That night, I lay awake with Ruby's phone hidden under my pillow. For the first time in days, I felt like I had control, like maybe my story wasn't ending here after all. And as I drifted into sleep, a thought burned in my mind. If Brandon thought I was done, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. After Ruby handed me that phone, everything shifted. It wasn't the phone itself, it was the possibility it represented. A single line of connection, a thread out of the maze Brandon had sewn around me. That afternoon, while the facility hummed with its usual routines, Ruby slipped me a folded scrap of paper. "Found this in Mr. Henley's things after he passed," she said, eyes cautious. "No one claimed it. Thought you might like a little luck." She handed me a lottery ticket. It was creased and slightly yellowed, the numbers penciled in by someone with shaky handwriting. I almost laughed. The idea that a crumpled old ticket could change. Anything felt absurd. But when you're cornered, you start to clutch at improbabilities. I tucked it into my bra, steadying myself with the tiny thud of a heartbeat I hadn't been sure I still owned. That night, once the lights dimmed and the hallways emptied, I slipped out of bed and made my way to the common room. The facility had an ancient desktop, one of those clunky machines that wheezed when you booted it up. And Ruby showed me how to pull up the lottery website. My hands trembled as I typed in the numbers from the ticket, then hit enter. For a ridiculous second, I expected nothing. Then the screen updated and the numbers matched. Every one of them. I remember the exact second the world sold off its last shred of normalcy. The cold realization, followed by a throb of fear so intense, it felt like electricity under my skin. I wasn't thinking about champagne or new clothes. I was thinking, if Brandon finds out I have this, he'll come for me. If anyone connected to him has even a sniff of it, my life will become chaos. Fame wasn't what I wanted. Safety was. I printed the confirmation, folded it until it was the size of a postage stamp, and hid it inside my bra, tucked tight against my chest. I sat there for a long time, watching the glow of the screen paint the room blue. It wasn't joy that filled me. It was an animal. Alertness, a knowledge that everything had changed, and that I had to move, and move now. Ruby didn't ask questions. She just nodded, as if she'd always known this would be the moment. "Don't tell anyone," she whispered. "Not the staff. Not Doris, not your son. We'll figure it out." A few days later, Ruby guided me to a volunteer who came through the facility. A young lawyer named Aaron. He visited twice a month to help residents with wills and simple paperwork. There was something discreet about him. The way his eyes skimmed over things and then caught, settled. He didn't look like someone who wanted to be the star in a story. He looked like someone with professional patience. We met in the tiny break room. I slid the printed lottery confirmation across the table and watched his face go still. Then he leaned in. "You know what this means?" he asked. Not with glee, but with the calm focus of someone who knew procedures and loopholes. I told him everything I could without crumbling. How I'd been brought here. The packed suitcase. The phone taken. The signatures on papers I barely understood. I told him I suspected theft, forgery, a pattern of behaviors that painted Brandon in a very different light. He didn't flinch. "We'll need to move quietly," he said. "Power of attorney can be abused. We'll set up protections, a blind trust, a new mailing address. You'll need new documentation, legal names, a burner phone, financial insulation. If you're serious about disappearing, I can help." I was serious. More serious than I'd ever been about anything. This wasn't a fantasy. It was oxygen. Aaron worked with the patience of someone who'd handled desperate cases before. He lined up the paperwork, found a trustworthy financial advisor he'd worked with, and spoke to contacts who specialized in elder law and asset protection. We created layers, trusts under new names, paper trails that didn't trace back to me, and contingency plans that Aaron insisted on, then insisted on again. We moved in whispers. He notarized documents. The financial advisor established a blind trust under a made-up entity not tied to my birth name. We opened a P.O. box, registered a modest property, through the trust in a rural county where privacy was easier to buy than fame. He arranged for a low-profile payout plan so the money wouldn't arrive in one headline-grabbing lump. The nights before I left were sleepless. I rehearsed every move in my head, the clothes in the duffel, the printed confirmation hidden under floorboards, the burner phone battery charged and tucked into a pocket, the duplicate set of keys Aaron insisted on. I packed like someone smuggling a life, because that's exactly what I was doing. Ruby hugged me tight the night I left. "Don't forget us," she said, voice thin with something that might have been hope or fear. "And don't do anything reckless." I didn't cry. The well of tears had been emptied in that beige room. Instead, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration as I slipped out before dawn. The staff did a quick head count and chalked it up to a wandering resident. Brandon probably assumed I'd been moved, lost, or worse. He had no idea I was leaving on my own terms. The bus ride out of Ohio was long and quiet. I sat near the back with my hood up and the duffel at my feet, my heart pounding like a second passenger. I remember watching the fields pass, thinking of all the small, ordinary things that would never be ordinary again. The smell of my kitchen, the swing of my front door, the mailbox that used to hold bills and birthday cards. Aaron had arranged a small old brick house in rural Tennessee. It was hardly a mansion. Chipped paint, a sagging porch, a crooked mailbox, but it had heat, running water, and a distance measured in county, lines and phone hops from the people who had tried to make me disappear. The first night in that house, I sat on a chair with my back to the window and the lottery ticket. Now real money, locked under the floorboards. For the first time in days, I slept without someone else's schedule dictating my breathing. But peace was a fragile thing. I couldn't shake the feeling that Brandon would smell the change in the air and come looking. I was careful. I created a fake social profile to check on him. And it didn't take long before I saw his plea online, a post begging for help, painting himself as the worried son. I laughed then, a breathless, bitter laugh. They had no idea what I knew. That night, as I sat in the lamplight, I made a decision. I would not only protect what was mine, I would make sure he felt the consequences of taking it. But I would not be reckless. I had to be smarter than rage. I had to be surgical. And so I began to plan, slowly, quietly, the way a chess player sets the board while the opponent thinks the pieces are being shuffled at random. After I put the final layers of protection in place, the plan switched from survival to exposure. I wasn't interested in spectacle. I didn't want a daytime TV circus. I wanted consequences, legal, irreversible, and precise. I wanted the truth to land where it belonged, in paper, in prosecutors' hands, and in courts that didn't care whether the accused was your son or a stranger. I made one more anonymous delivery. With Aaron's help, I compiled the forged loan documents, the bank statements showing transfers in my name, the IRS flags that linked returns to my identity, and a timeline of every suspicious emergency Brandon had invented. I included copies of emails, a list of account numbers, and the scans of signatures that didn't match my own. Each sheet was meticulously labeled, dated, and put into a package with no return address. Then I mailed it, certified, to the Department of Justice, not for revenge, for insurance, for the record. If anything happened to me, there would be a trail that led directly to the man I used to call my son. A week later, I watched Brandon's social media melt into a chorus of worry and outrage. He called radio shows, posted videos about a missing elderly mother, and preached about how he was desperately searching. It was theater. It was performance. I felt only a cool, unsentimental satisfaction. He was about to be watched the way he had once watched me, and that would be the beginning. Then the first knock came. It wasn't the polite ritual knock of a delivery man. It was heavy, purposeful, the kind that makes you pause and count heartbeats. I didn't open the door. I peered through the curtain and saw 2 men in suits and an official car idling at the curb. My breath was steady. I felt oddly calm. Aaron had told me all the likely scenarios. He'd coached me through questions and how to answer them. He reminded me that fear is a tool and testimony is weight. If I spoke plainly, if I kept copies and dates and witnesses, I would be credible. I had done the work. I had done the waiting. Now I would let the process run. A federal agent stepped through my doorway with a badge and a folder. He introduced himself politely and asked if I could come down to answer some questions. I nodded. The whole time I kept my hands visible. I handed over the floorboard box, the printed confirmations, and the files I'd mailed weeks before. He looked through them, his face unreadable. Then he said words I never expected to hear. "You did the right thing coming forward. This helps us a lot." That was the moment the game shifted. Investigations started to link. Bank audits drew lines that connected to Brandon's name, to his phone, to accounts, and addresses he'd thought were clever. The Department of Justice contacted states where false returns had been filed. A federal probe is not a rumor you can ignore. It is a machine that asks questions and demands answers. It moves slowly, methodically, and with teeth. When the subpoenas arrived at his doorstep, I will admit something that probably sounds cold. I felt relief. Not because I wanted to see him destroyed, but because finally there would be a reckoning. He wouldn't be able to gaslight the world with sob stories and charity galas. There would be paper. There would be subpoenas. There would be a record, of course. There were emotional ghosts. There were nights when I pictured him small again, mud on his knees, sticky fingers, breath smelling of bubblegum. Those memories sat like stones in my chest. Love doesn't disappear because of crimes. It changes shape. It becomes grief, and then it becomes resolve. He reached out once, through an attorney, begging for mercy, claiming he'd been confused, manipulated by business partners, by stress, by grief over his father. I listened to the recording. Aaron made of the call he tried to place to me, the same arrogance, the same practiced regret. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The law spoke in a language neither of us could translate with excuses. Trials are messy. Evidence is messy. But the facts are stubborn. The forensic accountants took apart ledgers and matched signatures, with samples taken from years-old greeting, cards in legal forms. Devices were subpoenaed. Emails were traced. Witnesses who'd once been paid or silenced found. Courage to speak when the stakes shifted. At court, the prosecuting attorney laid it out like a map. "Here," she said softly, "is the pattern." And on that map, the path led back to Brandon. Loans, falsified signatures, returns filed in dead people's names, accounts siphoned, threats left unspoken but implied. The jury wasn't buying the performance. The evidence doesn't need to be loud to be deadly. When the verdict came, I was in the courtroom. I watched him look older than his years, hollow-eyed. The boy with the grin replaced by a man who had to answer for what he'd done. I heard the verdict, guilty on multiple counts, and I felt a strange, unadorned peace settle over me. I don't tell you this to gloat. I tell you this because life taught me something cruel and true. Sometimes the people who harm you are the ones you trust the most. And sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it comes like a quiet knock at the door and the slow closing of a book. After the court, I reclaimed simple things. I returned to small pleasures that had nothing to do with money or vindication. I cooked pancakes on Sunday mornings because the ritual itself was a reclaiming. I mailed a letter to Ruby and Aaron, thanking them for their belief and their bravery. I visited Doris in the facility once, brought flowers that this time I bought for myself, and we read old magazines and shared the quiet of two women who had survived. People ask me what I would have done differently. Maybe I should have seen the signs earlier. Maybe I should have been more suspicious. The truth is, hindsight is a clear but cruel lens. It shows fractures you can't fix. It doesn't change the years when you were a mother doing what mothers do. Protect. Forgive, hope. So what would I tell you? If you're watching and something feels off with someone you love, don't dismiss the whisper of your gut. Keep your paperwork. Keep copies. Talk to a lawyer you trust. Protect your identity. Love your children, but protect yourself first. And to those who say, "How could you leave?" I say this, I didn't leave because I wanted to escape. I left because staying would have erased me. Leaving was the only way to preserve everything I had left of myself. If this story resonates with you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. If you want more stories like this, real people, real betrayals, real second acts, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they can come back from being pushed aside. In the end, I wasn't a victim. I was a witness to my pain, to my son's choices, and to the truth. I found a way to make the truth louder than the lies. That for me was enough.